One by one, the banks are falling like dominoes. Welcome back, everybody. We got to talk about First Republic Bank and the crisis that is ensuing around a bunch of rich people rushing and pulling their money out. Now, I find it very hilarious. And I know it's a very situation. It's a very serious situation. But I do find it sort of hilarious and ironic that banks that cater to wealthy people are the banks that are actually collapsing. Because regardless of how wealthy the clientele of a bank is a bank. A bank takes deposits and it invests most of the deposits. And what happens is people rush the bank. They all want their deposits out at once. There's not enough cash and the bank collapses. So funny enough, even rich people can panic, and that's especially caused by the FDIC insurance limit. If you are richy rich and you've got more than $250,000 in the bank, well, guess what? You're going to lose your money potentially. So a lot of rich people are potentially going to bring down First Republic Bank. Now the question is this bank actually going to collapse? Is this the next Silicon Valley Bank? We see pictures here of people in line at First Republic Bank. May just be people trying to normally take their money out. Obviously, probably not. This is probably some panic ensuing. But we don't know for certain if this bank is going to die. It could die, but it could also survive and potentially make you a lot of money. Why do I say that? But before we dive into it, I just want to be 100% clear. I am probably not going to have any speculative investment in this stock. If you do decide to invest in this stock, you need to understand that a bank run is basically in the process of happening. And while there's some developments that have taken place, that does not mean the stock could not go to zero potentially. So keep that in mind, okay? But the drama is actually getting really, really, really interesting. Because number one, the bank has published multiple announcements on their website saying, oh, we have over $60 billion that we could borrow in unused borrowing capacity from the Federal Home Loan Bank. And our investment portfolio is less than 15% of total bank assets. We have a diverse customer base. Don't worry, don't fret. This isn't going to be Silicon Valley Bank. And on top of that, this bank also had a massive $30 billion quote-unquote bailout, where a bunch of very big banks that you may have heard of, Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of New York Mellon, PNC Bank, State Street, Truist, and U.S. Bank, all deposited a total of $30 billion into this bank on March 16th, 2023, to keep it alive, okay? This is what normally happens when a group of bankers get together and decide to bail out another bank. They say, hey, we're going to make sure this bank doesn't collapse. Because if you actually look at the financials, which we're going to do, the bank, while, there are some concerning things on its balance sheet, it also really wasn't the worst bank in the world, okay? This is the balance sheet. Let's go ahead and look at the statement of income. So we could see that they have net investment or net interest income that has gone up year over year. That's all their interest income minus the cost of deposits. You have to pay, obviously, interest to your depositors and borrowing money from other banks or the Federal Reserve. You have to pay interest on that. Their net investment interest has gone up year over year. Same thing here. So they're making more money on interest, okay? Their total earnings per share has gone down a little bit, at least quarter over quarter. But year over year, it's gone up. So they're growing their earnings. They're growing their net investment income or net interest income. They seem to be doing pretty well, okay? You go look at their balance sheet, and as of December 31st, 2022, they had $4.2 billion of cash. They had $3.3 billion of debt securities available for sale. And they had $28 billion of debt securities held to maturity. Now, like I said, the big panic was that a lot of these banks had a ton of securities that were in long-term bonds that they bought at historically low interest rates. And when you're forced to sell those bonds, you're in trouble. This bank is a little bit different than Silicon Valley Bank, okay? Silicon Valley Bank had a ton of money, like a huge part of their balance sheet in these two line items right here. Whereas First Republic Bank has way more loans spread across a diverse amount of different types of investments. So right off the bat, it's a very different type of situation. But that doesn't necessarily matter, because at the end of the day, when you have a bank run, you see the total deposits here, 176 billion. If people freak out enough and they say, hey, I want my cash out, all these people, when they see these numbers, are going to try and claim this cash out of the bank. So you can see the problem where people are trying to pull out all of this, and the bank only has this to be able to give to their customers. Do you see the potential issue there, ladies and gentlemen? That's exactly the problem. But now this bank has had massive influxes of cash, okay? It basically has gotten bailed out by other banks. It's not a bailout. It just looks like the other banks are depositing funds into the bank because it's in the other bank's self-interest to keep First Republic Bank alive. If these banks keep falling like dominoes, this could potentially destroy every bank out there, because every single bank in the world does not have enough cash to meet the instant withdrawal requests of all the depositors, obviously, okay? So it's a very interesting thing that's going on here. Very, very, very interesting. Now, if we look at the recent share price action, we can see that the bank price has just absolutely collapsed. It's at, what, $19.50 after hours? I mean, this is wild. And this was right after we just heard news that the other banks, very large institutions, had deposited a cumulative $30 billion, and they're able to draw on a bunch of credit lines. Why is everybody still panicking out? Are people really thinking that this tidal wave of deposit requests is going to continue? It could, and this bank could still collapse. That's 100% true. But it is in a much better cash position than it was just a few short days ago. So it could potentially survive. And if this bank does survive and the panic passes, you could potentially make a lot of money. If you look at the price to books compared to the other. Oh my God, look how cheap this is. This is insane, okay? Now, like I said, you need to be very careful. People are losing their minds, and if people are scared enough, they can literally destroy anything. Any bank whatsoever. They could easily destroy it. This bank could go under, 100%. But there's also the possibility that you could potentially make money. I could see the bull case for this. Now, like I said, I don't know if I'm going to make a speculative bet, and if I did, it would be a very small part of my portfolio. Just say, hey, you know, maybe this bank will survive. Maybe the panic will be stemmed by all the reassurances of massive institutions being behind it. Maybe this is where the contagion stops. I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts, okay? Very, very interesting play. I've heard some other people are potentially investing in this, and I can kind of see why, because of that massive deposit at a minimum is more reassuring to me that this bank could potentially not collapse. But then again, it still could, so keep that in mind. So that's kind of my initial thoughts. I mean, I think fundamentally this is a different scenario. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same scenario, obviously, but the actual portfolio of this bank is a little bit different than Silicon Valley Bank, okay? Most of this bank's in home loans, okay? Home loans, home equity lines of credit, multifamily homes. You can see how this bank's portfolio is massively different than Silicon Valley Bank, which had a huge position in long-term held-to-maturity securities. So, just kind of my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers!